Magandang araw muli sa ating lahat. Ako si Professor Shirley Guevarra, Dekana ng Kolehiyo ng Ekonomiyang Pantahanan. Ako po ay isang food technologist na ngayon ay nagtuturo ng mga kurso ukol sa food service at hotel management sa ilalim ng Department of Hotel, Restaurant and Institution Management. Ang aming kolehiyo ay nakatuon sa pang-araw-araw na pangangailangan ng pamilyang Pilipino tulad ng pagkain, pananamit, tirahan at pakikitungo sa loob ng pamilya. Ang kursong FN1 na pinamagatang Food Trip ay isang general education course na ibinibigay ng Department of Food Science and Nutrition ng aming kolehiyo. Dito tinatalakay ang iba't ibang aspeto ng pagkain sa pang-araw-araw na buhay ng tao at lipunan. Pinag-uusapan rito ang social, cultural, economic, political at psychological na mga aspeto ng pagkain at mga praktikal na pamamaraan upang masiguro at mapabuti ang kalusugan at nutrisyon ng ating sarili at ng ating pamilya. Kasama ko muli dito ang mga guro ng kursong ito.
Muli magandang araw. Ako naman si Dr. Blanca Villarino, isang food technologist na nagtuturo ng mga kurso ukol sa statistics and food research methods at sensory evaluation.
Ako naman po si Professor Airon Bonifacio, isang registered nutritionist dietitian na nagtuturo ng mga kurso ukol sa public health nutrition. Ako rin ang college information officer ng aming kolehiyo. So ating pagpatuloy ang ating segment na pinamagatang Kainsaysayan. At sa nakaraang episodes, atin na po naumpisahan ng talakayan tungkol sa paraan ng pamumuhay at pagkain ng ating mga ninuno during the pre-colonial period at pati na rin sa panahon ng Kastila. So sa episode naman na ito, ating ipagpapatuloy ang talakayan sa evolusyon ng ating food cuisine muli naman sa pagdating ng mga Amerikano at pagbuo ng unang Commonwealth ng Pilipinas.
Nako, isang honor muli na makasama namin ang aming suki, ang kagalang-galang nating panauhin na si Ginang Felice Prudente Santa Maria. Siya po ay isang food historian, cultural worker at culinary heritage advocate for 50 years. No? Napakahabang panahon na po yan. He pioneers Philippine food history and specializes in the Spanish and American colonial eras. She's the author of several award-winning books, including The Governor General's Kitchen, Culinary Vignettes and Period Recipes from 1521 to 1935, The Foods of Jose Rizal, and the recently released Pigafetta's Philippine Picnic Book. Ma'am Felice, kamusta kayo?
Eto na naman tayo. American colonial period naman tayo.
Nakakatuwa, no? Marami tayong pag-uusapan tungkol dyan. Kasi syempre, marami na rin kaming nabasa. Yung henerasyon namin ay marami na kami nabasa tungkol dyan. Kaya, sige, didiretso na po tayo ngayon sa unang tanong.
Magandang araw po muli, Ma'am Felice. So since we're talking about po, ang pag-usapan po natin ngayon ay yung American era, kung tatawagin po. Ano po ba yung mga importanteng programa patungkol sa public health at education ang sinimulang ituro ng mga Amerikano nung dumating po sila dito sa ating bansa?
Well, ang American period, okay, so our history of food is developmental, no? It transitions. So let's review. Pre-colonial era, we were eating to stay alive. We were eating for survival. Spanish period, we were also eating for survival. And then we were eating also to make a country statement. We realized that food could tell other people who we were as Filipinos. When the American period settled in, we continued all of that, by the way, but we learned to eat to sustain good public health. The term public health now became part of our culinary culture. And we also were eating towards food sustainability, towards food security. a sustainable food security in times of peace, during emergencies, which at the time, by the way, included cholera and typhoons, and wartime. So you can see that the scope, the importance of food is getting bigger, wider, more important. And it is moving from the community to the individual to the nation. And now we're also going to see the importance of the nation's food to a more global perspective. That is what starts to happen during the American period. When they arrived, they really considered public health and public education as fundamental to their government strategies. One of the first things they did was to create a Bureau of Science, which had a school of agriculture. And then they influenced the public school system by creating home economics, by offering agriculture in the basic grades as well. And then they also had, of course, a teachers program. So teachers would know how to teach home economics. So here, home economics or domestic science now became a university program. The home economics program was really important to them because it allowed the women to also become educated in the American ideas of citizenship. That is what they had also done in the United States, where home economics began after the Civil War. The Americans decided that they needed more colleges in the rural areas. In those days, there were only the Ivy League universities. But now the United States, after the Civil War, wanted a more educated public. So they brought schools into farming communities. And they said, we have all these men getting educated. What happens to the women? They must also be equally educated. And thus home economics became a subject. When the Americans came here, the American women said, you've got to incorporate home economics into our public school system. And what they observed was that Filipino women, among all the Asian women, Filipino women seemed to be the more powerful. Men gave their money to the women. It was up to the woman to budget. Women could inherit property. Women didn't have to walk in back of a man, at the back of a man. Women were more, in a way, liberated, more powerful. There were so many women in business. So the American American home economics teachers realized that home economics could be one of the strongest forces in creating the modern Filipino woman, according to what the Americans thought was the modern woman. And what did home economics do? It made people excited about recipes. I have not found any Philippine published cookbooks during the Spanish period. And trust me, I have been looking. They begin to come out at the start of the American period. First, we have a textbook, public school textbook in English for home economics. And the recipes that are incorporated are many American recipes because they had no idea what the Philippines was, but also some Philippine foods already incorporated. What happens? We have what seems to be the very first Filipino published recipe book coming out, La Cocina Filipina. It's written in Spanish. Nobody knows who the author is. These were supposed to have been recipes that were dictated by cooks, and this compiler put them together. And most of the recipes are from a gentry, from gentry cooking, but they already incorporate things like pancit and lumpia, a lot of Filipino foods. At the same time, or rather a few years later, we have another Filipino cookbook coming out by Pura Villanueva Calao called La Cocina, a cookbook, which incorporates food of the provinces. It is the first time that she shows us, or that somebody shows that there's cooking in Cebu, cooking in Mindanao, cooking in Laguna, Tagalog cooking from Manila, and that they're all different. So she puts this together in her cookbook of 1918. So there are even more recipes coming out because at this point in time, we now have more newspapers. There are more newspapers coming out. So people are reading more. There are women's magazines coming out. Newspapers have cooking sections, okay? And all of this because in home economics, every girl receives a textbook to take home, and the textbook includes recipes. That home economics textbook was the first cookbook, first recipe book that every Filipino girl had. And for the first time, you get a sense of what is cooking around the country. Because as the textbooks became more and more mature, they began to incorporate more and more recipes from around the country. So the sense of cooking of a student in home economics became more national in scope. So you can see how the power of the food also helps us say, this is who we are. These are the foods we eat. Some of the other things that occurred because of home economics was that we were eating for health. We were eating for nutrition. Those concepts of health and nutrition are modern. You cannot blame earlier cultures for not talking about them because they had not yet become scientific concepts. It just so happened that when the Americans came, and they were very big on science, nutrition was already a concept. It was already a science. And the home economics program was really encouraged to make the home the heart of the country. It also, as I had mentioned earlier, was there to increase the power of the Filipino woman.
Ang ganda po nung sharing nyo regarding lang po as a nutritionist, no. So talaga nanggaling nga po kasi yung aming field, no, from home economics din kasi doon nga po siya nagsimula, no, in terms of our program here in the College of Home Economics. And definitely si Dean ay masasabi tungkol sa College of Home Economics na Dean.
Thank you. Thank you, Ma'am Felice, for mentioning home economics. No? And I'd like to inform you that we are celebrating our 100 years as a discipline in the University of the Philippines next year. No, tinatagpo kami ng November, so November po kami magwa 100 years. And I can say that home economics has gone a long way since that Placid conference in the US where Mr. Dewey and the rest of his team established the home economics, or what we call domestic science as a discipline. Ano? Nung unang panahon, nung inumpisahan ito ay ang punteriya lang nila ay improve air and water quality, nutrition, at of course yung agricultural, paggamit ng mga agricultural products. Since napag-usapan na rin po natin yung evolution na yon, paano po naapektuhan ng global industrialization ang ating foodways, food culture, and agriculture noong panahon yun?
Well, as we all know, food history is also the history of science and technology. I think what I'd like to mention is that in 1919, the government, the colonial government, still headed by the Americans, set up the National Development Corporation to create new industries and to identify tax sources. The profits from food products was very, very apparent. At that period, we were already starting to import a lot of canned goods from the United States. We already, by the way, had canned goods coming in during the Spanish era, but the height of the import of foreign canned goods was during the American period. Because after the First World War, the United States also needed to have markets for its own products. So by the 1930s, and I'm quoting here and I have to look at it, the average importation of food products in the Philippines was 48 million pesos. And that was a lot of money. As the Philippine leadership realized that indeed the Philippines was on track to become a republic, it realized that it needed to conserve foreign currency for things like arming the military, especially when it looked like a second world war was approaching. It also wanted to prioritize ways by which farmers, because the number one profession, there was no unemployment. There was no unemployment as far as they were concerned. Most people were farmers or fishers. So how do you increase the profit that our farmers and our fishers and our ranchers can have? And part of that is by producing the imported goods that everybody liked, like the imported tuna, the imported biscuits, the lard that was being imported. How can we produce those products locally and create more profits for the workforce, more profits for the ones producing the raw materials that will be used by these factories, the entire food chain, in other words? How can we increase profit from the whole food chain and lessen importation? And in addition, how will we feed the Philippine military? We cannot be buying imported food for them. We cannot keep spending money on imported rations for families every time there's a typhoon, every time there's a volcanic eruption. The government can't do it. So let us look inwards and see what we can do locally to fulfill those functions. So this National Foods Corporation decided, and they had a very good system. You have to look at it, the models. The models were pretty good. Some of them succeeded, some of them didn't. But they started canning mango cheeks. They canned santol and syrup. They canned bangus in all sorts of flavors. They made tomato sauce. They had canned adobo, beef caldereta, estofado, papaitan, salsiado carne, all of these things. They were canning mango jams and tamarind jams. And they were encouraging at the same time the artisans to continue making nipa vinegar, sugarcane vinegar, coconut vinegar, and that we should start consuming local products, which is why the idea of protectionism started to get stronger and stronger. And by the time the Commonwealth was inaugurated in 1935, the Commonwealth was given 10 years to prepare the Philippines for full independence. So over that 10-year program, there was an amazing holistic developmental program so that we would solve this food situation. We would be able to decrease the imports, increase the local production, and at the same time, they added social justice legislation to help the farmers and the fishers who they felt were not earning enough because of the middlemen, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, they were also encouraging local technology. So it just so happened that at the time the United States arrived in the Philippines, there was a shift in kitchen technology. It didn't happen earlier. It happened to occur during the time of the US. So they were selling refrigerators. The refrigerators were going to replace the ice boxes that were once the luxury kitchen appliance during the end of the Spanish era, which is also why ice was extremely important, because you had all these ice boxes to help preserve food. And now you had refrigerators, and you had stoves, and the stoves had ovens. You could bake at home in the kitchen. And these could be powered by electricity. They could be powered by gas. So you have a shift now in technology. Now, the shift in technology, of course, will be a bit slow, just like the technology shifts today. They will begin where people have the means. They will begin where people congregate and believe in this new technology. Not everybody believed that it was better to have a new fanangled American stove rather than the old cooking with the Callanta. So that was part of the whole science and technology that was arriving. There was also the invention of the Japanese ice scraper, the Asahi brand ice scraper, and the ice crusher that was patented in Japan, which is why eventually we had our little ice cream parlors that were also Mongo Conielo parlors, which opened up the door to the whole idea of selling drinks with crushed or shaved ice, which could go beyond just Mongo. You could also have whatever you wanted to put in there, all those preserved fruits in syrup, all the nata de cocos, the nata de piñas, all of that could be thrown into crushed ice. You could combine ice with ice cream. So again, this was part of the technology that came into play during the American period. Now, another
Ma'am,
important, yes.
Sige po. Ma'am Felice, if I may interject, naalala ko yung Gabaldon House. Yung Gabaldon House ay isang parang kitchen na ginawa nila sa kada isang eskwelahan at doon nila ipinasok yung modelo ng isang modern kitchen, no? Na nandun yung refrigerator, yung oven. So ito ay parang sinasabi nila ay contribution ng mga Amerikano, yung Gabaldon House. Unfortunately, yung elementary school na pinanggalingan ko, nawala na po yung building na yon. Marami na pong mga public schools na inalis na po yung model kitchen na yon. So
well,
nakakalungkot.
You're very correct. The home economics program mandated that each school have not only a model kitchen, but a model home. And this is where the girls could practice the sanitation that was being taught, how to properly wash a glass, how to properly wash a plate, to remove the germs, how to use soap or some kind of a soap, how to use hot water, the whole concept of germs being in the house, how to sweep without scattering the germs, for instance. All of this was taught. and the model kitchen, the model house. All of this was part of creating a modern generation. But you see, the public school was for children of a certain age. There was a problem. The Commonwealth realized that if it was going to become a real republic, and it wanted to be a model republic. Remember, this is President Quezon. President Quezon, anything he did, he wanted it to be the best. He wanted it to be the model. Okay? How could you have a model Asian republic if less than 51% of your voters were illiterate? This was a concern. It cropped up in the 20s, and by the time of the Commonwealth, they said, we have to address this. We must make 51% of our voting republic literate. We need to get to the adults, the folk who did not have a chance to go to the public school system. And so they created the Adult Education Program in 1937. It was a combination of an anti-illiteracy effort plus incorporating home economics, incorporating modern agriculture, incorporating the idea of marketing, the idea of civics, the idea of following legislation, following law, the fact that the Commonwealth had passed laws to protect farmers. So all of this was packaged, and it was packaged with public health as the chief concern. All of it was connected. I've written a paper on that, and I think it's an important product of the Commonwealth that has been overlooked. Now, what happened in terms of home economics? Okay. Whereas the public school had recipes with how many cups of this, how many teaspoons of this, how hot should the fire in an oven be, the adult education was different. They said, adults who are already cooking, they don't cook by how many cups. They just look at the ingredients, they chop them up, and they get a handful and they throw it into the cooking pan. And they said, people don't cook alike. I make adobo my way, you make adobo another way. Who's to say that your adobo is better than mine? So it was a very practical approach. What else did they do? And here you see a little bit of the Spanish era returning. They tried to convince the folk in the provinces to create a sustainable, organic garden. They would have in the back vegetables that could feed them. They had chickens and pigs. Again, there's that cycle with the manure, okay? And then they had in the front a nice little garden with flowers. So again, and fences, and the fencing had shrubs like gumamela. They even suggested what kind of shrubs to plant in the front, like gumamela, what kind of trees to grow, fruit trees, and they included katuray trees. So there was a lot of katuray being cooked. Now you can hardly find katuray. But this was part of attempting. In a way, it's social engineering. It was a way to attempt to again improve the landscape of people being able to feed themselves and communities coming together at the Adult Education Center. And at the Adult Education Center, they were teaching how to cook these new recipes. So women in Bohol were learning how to cook a Luzon dish, and people in Luzon were learning how to cook People in Tagalog area were learning how to cook a bicol dish, and the women were getting excited because they were going to school. They haven't been left out. This is very important. And one of the goals was to make people who were not used to discourse, not used to discussion, not used to civics questions, to now become more comfortable discussing these issues among themselves, discussing food security among themselves, legislation that was needed to protect the food. All of this came in through the adult education program, which balanced the public school program from elementary to university. So you can see this attempt, and food always there. The farming families also were learning what the children were learning, that certain diets were healthier for you. That is why they were encouraged to grow more vegetables. They were encouraged to have things that could grow every season. There was something you could get from your garden to feed yourself. You were encouraged to pickle. You were encouraged to make fruits in syrup. The surplus you could sell. So you can see how food was coming together as part of civics education. Having that food security was part of making a nation stable. That was very important. Now, for the farmers, they were taught about things like blight-proof seeds, how to do intercropping, how to do crop rotation. If you were in a flooded area, how you could raise your soil beds up and grow certain vegetables. So again, the food was crucial. The government program for food was very important.
Ma'am Felice, so ang dami niyo pong na-share at ang dami po namin natutunan. At kanina po nabanggit niyo po yung mga technologies and then of course education. So alam namin din po natin na yung when you introduce technology and education, it will eventually lead to increased income sa mga families po. So I'm sure parang na-imagine ko po nung time na yon na dahil nagkakaroon po ng additional education at technologies, nagkakaroon din po ng additional income yung mga family. So, nung time po na yon na nag-i-increase yung mga income nila, meron po bang nagbago or paano po ba na-impluwensyahan yung pagdami ng kanilang income sa paraan ng pamumuhay noon, especially po siguro sa pagkain or yung pag-manage nila ng sa bahay?
Well, the food situation during the American period allowed the increase in the number of restaurants. There were more people working, and so wherever they were working, there were also convenience food stations, like little restaurants and carinerias. There were bibingka parlors. So, in other words, the whole idea of profit from food expanded. In addition, the factories, there were food factories, and people could work in the food factories. There were cooperatives, there were agricultural cooperatives. So people, again, could try to expand the safety of what they were earning through a cooperative. So that was part of the American period. But did I answer the question? I may not have understood it correctly.
Yes, ma'am. So parang the question was, paano po nabago yung buhay nila sa pag-increase po ng kanilang income? Kasi with all the technologies, I'm sure pumapasok po sila sa mga business or nagkakaroon po sila ng, siguro yung trabaho nila mas nag-i-improve. That's why they have more income or disposable income po na pwede nila ibili ng ganito.
Yes.
Or yun nga po, yung, kung may mga restaurants pong umusbong, mas kumakain po ba sila sa labas? Ganyan po.
Yeah, so you can see again that the more education, the more safety of the career, the more funds, just like during the Enlightenment period before the Revolution. Now, what also happened during the American period is that the choices of food that a person could buy increased. As I was saying, we had been spending so much on the importation of food, to the point, and we were spending so much on the importation of food, we were overjoyed by the fact that there were all these recipes that we could make, foreign food and local food. Just like during the Spanish period, we were cooking local food and we were cooking international food. Okay, same thing, American period. But now the new thing, as I had mentioned, is that there were more canned goods coming in. These canned goods were convenience goods, and they were vegetables and fruits that, again, they were new to us. Just like during the Spanish period, there were new fruits, there were new vegetables coming in from the New World and coming in from insular Southeast Asia and coming in from the Asian continent. So here we again have new foods. And to the point that there was actually a golden age in home cooking. The middle class, whether it's the very, very affluent middle class or the less affluent middle class, they were excited by all of these new products, all of these new recipes. And it got to the point where the import houses, the ones importing all these goods, started competing with each other. The brands, American brands, Spanish brands, Australian brands, French brands, these all started competing with themselves. And so what was one way to win your market? One was to advertise on radio. That was the big thing then. Aside from the ads in the newspapers and magazines, remember I mentioned that there was more to read during the US period. There was radio. And people would wait to listen to the radio because somebody was going to share a recipe. A movie star was going to share a recipe. An actress on stage was going to share a recipe. An Italian chef was going to share over radio how to cook an Italian dish. So that was the way that brands became popular. And before you know it, people were cooking and enjoying themselves. So the system fed upon itself and nourished itself. So people got excited about food, imported food, and locally grown fresh foods as well.
Yes, ma'am. Maganda nga po yung parang I think yung the point of yung mga sharing po ninyo nung nagkaroon na rin po tayo ng like dole was from the American ano po, 'di ba? Dinala dito and mas marami tayo na produce na locally na canned foods, and alam po natin that war is one of like the main impetus of creating these food items na hindi madali mag-perish, no, na kayang dalhin kahit saan, na like canned meat. It was, I think, part of the American technology because of war. And ano po, going to that, no, ano po yung naging epekto ng World War II sa ating food supply, no, nung panahon na yun? Kasi one of like the biggest parts of our history is that. And definitely, it had, sabi niyo po, meron tayong golden period. Was it affected? Ano na po nangyari after that?
Well, the golden period was both in the cities, where all the new technology was and a lot of the imported food was, but also in the areas where the adult education program centered, which means in the rural areas. And the point there was to increase the food producing capability and the food security from the rural areas, aside from having kitchen gardens in the city. Now, the adult education program, it called in people from all the different government agencies to pitch in. And so we had people from the husbandry college at UP, and people who were in the Bureau of Animal Industry, for instance. They were assigning people to go out into the countryside. The veterinarians go out into the countryside and teach. Okay, this is like a rural reconstruction movement, which, by the way, began as part of adult education, the rural reconstruction movement. So among the volunteers who went out were the women of the Bureau of Plant Industry. And these were women who had, with the help of the food scientist Maria Orosa, they had learned how to take local ingredients and make sure that when you tried to put them in syrup, for instance, your recipe wouldn't fail. They taught the importance of following recipes when it came to food preservation. And it was with the help of all these women who were now science-oriented and applying the science that they had learned that the stability of food in the rural area was more or less accomplished. People knew that a war was coming. You know, if you look at the Philippine newspapers and Sunday magazines from the late 1930s, when Hitler was already imposing himself in Europe, you will notice that every week there was an issue, there was part of an issue devoted to the war in Europe. Then we have the war in Manchuria. And people here are starting to get worried. And then it is reported that the Japanese joined the Germans and the Italians. So they're going, this isn't good. And when you look at the newspapers, they have things like how to build a Filipino air raid shelter in your house, how to buy a gas mask, how to stock food. All of this is being taught. They even had the women, the Girl Scouts, the college students, the boys in public school. Everybody was taught the emergency techniques, how to treat a wound, what to do with people who have a broken leg. You know, we were preparing for war. We really were. Now, Maria Orosa, people didn't know that she was a member. She was, in fact, she had the rank of captain, that Maria Orosa was part of the underground. And so she was smuggling food to the underground. And one of her concerns was the large number of American prisoners, well, not only American, but American and European prisoners of war at the University of Santo Tomas. And one of her inventions was what we know as the magic powder. Magic powder was soybean that was dried and turned into a high protein powder. And they would put this powder in bamboo, the long bamboo tubes. Because if the Japanese inspected it, the powder looked like book, they wouldn't think that it was the magic powder. Now, these long bamboo tubes, as many as they could smuggle in, were part of the requirements for construction workers. So every time there was construction going on at UST, whether for the Japanese or whatever, they would bring in these bamboo tubes loaded with the high protein powder. So one can see that the war showed how important science was for the first time. There was science, by the way, being introduced already during the Spanish period. There was already a laboratory with Anacleto de Rosario heading it. But all of that got cut off because the United States became the next in line for running the Philippines. But it was during the American period that more of that science was advertised to the public.
Mas naging ano po siya, accessible versus po no Spanish era na syempre yung mga Espanyol, they use, di ba, yung illiteracy din as a tool for colonization. Ayaw nga po nila na masyadong ma-empower yung mga Pilipino back then. Tama po ba?
Yes and no. I think that whole concept needs a little bit of studying, because there were also the Spanish, but you see, it got cut short. Okay, it got cut short. But there were also Spanish who were identifying themselves already as Filipino. Their habits, their manners, they were becoming closer and closer to the natives. Sometimes they were ridiculing the natives. I mean, it's terrible if you read it. But then on the other hand, when it came to allying with the Filipinos to kick out the Spanish that they didn't like, there were also Spaniards who wanted to kick out those people, because they said, how come only the peninsular Spanish can become president? Why not a Spaniard born in the Philippines? So you've got two different kinds of people, two different cultures, both wanting to kick out the former leaders. That's a whole story in itself. It's very, very interesting. Very, very
Thank you. Yeah. Siguro nga kulang po talaga ang panahon para pag-usapan lahat ng ang kasaysayan natin, lalo na sa perspektibo ng ating pag-uugali sa pagkain.
Felice, nabanggit niyo si Maria Orosa, no? Siguro gusto ko ding banggitin dito na siya yung gumawa ng o nag-develop po ng banana ketchup, no? Siguro dahil din sa karamihan ng banana sa Pilipinas, at nakatulong ito sa dagdag na pagkain, no, ng mga Pilipino noong panahon na yun.
Well, you know, Maria Orosa, it was in 1925 at a Manila carnival where the Bureau of Plant Industry for the first time exhibited all these possibilities that you could do with Philippine products. So you could have calamansi concentrate. Okay, that was becoming very fashionable. And then, of course, the banana ketchup. There were many products, you see, because this was part of that whole. Remember, we talked about the National Development Corporation and the concern to grow the local food business, so that there would be income for Filipinos from the local food industry. That was part of the reason that Maria Rosa's scientific, real science skills became important. And I think that if anything, the American period expands food, no longer just for physical survival, not only as a country identity, but food that is also for nutrition, food that is also for food security.
Yes.
But it's also the sense of, science matters.
Yes.
Science is important. And the fact that they were able to convince more Filipinos to go into the sciences, then that to me is very much a contribution of the American period that we sometimes overlook.
Thank you, Ma'am Felice, for that clarification. So bilang panghuli na po ito, napag-usapan natin yung science, yung huling banggit nyo. Siguro huling tanong din namin sa inyo at the final statement nyo na rin, yung about food literacy, ano po ang mga bagay na dapat nating matutunan at tandaan mula sa panahon na ito na pwede natin isabuhay ngayon?
Well, I think the number one message of the American era, if that's what you mean, the American colonial period, is that food security needs to be part of the entire government program. And food security is not only government involved, but private sector. Food security is not only communities, but the individuals in the community coming together and understanding what should we secure, what kind of food, how will we do it, how can we make sure. For instance, we have a pandemic right now. We need food, clearly. There is the possibility of the West Valley Fault moving. Okay. Where we have designated community centers for evacuees, could we not maybe do a planting scheme in that area so that there is some fresh food available? Is there a way to stockpile food in those areas so that people have something to eat immediately? If there is an evacuation route, like if Manila, for instance, is fractured, I don't know if you've read the JICA study, but it's terrible. I mean, Manila will collapse. Everything will go down. The water, the light, the cell towers, buildings will fall. There will be fires all over. People will have to either stay home if it's safe or evacuate. The routes for evacuation have been already noted. Those routes, the houses along those routes, the people on those routes, the government buildings along those routes already provide food. In other words, there are new ways to landscape for public food security. Condominiums now are raising food on their roof gardens. Families are now plantitos and plantitas, right? We have all of this growing. So I think the takeaway is that food is more important than we think. And that each one of us has to be responsible for somehow finding a way to keep ourselves from going hungry. And last takeaway, that wonderful word, naya-naya, that means
Yes.
we like to feed as much as we like to eat. May we never forget that that is part of Filipino culture. That is an ennobling trait, that we will feed those who need to be fed, because we will never allow anybody to go hungry. That is the Filipino. The heart of the Filipino is making sure no one goes hungry.
Naku, napakaganda po. Very well said. Yung naya-naya na sinasabi po ninyo ngayon ay nakikita na natin doon sa mga community pantries natin. Ano? So maraming salamat po Ma'am Felice Santa Maria sa pagbigay ng panahon upang ibahagi ang inyong kaalaman at karanasan. It is an honor for us po. At maraming salamat din sa aking mga partners dito, si Dr. Blanca at Professor Airon, sa pagsama muli sa akin sa napaka-interesanting talakayan natin. Sir Airon?
So ating sa segment na po ito, no, sa ating Kainsaysayan, ating pong napag-usapan ang Filipino food identity, no, sa iba't ibang panahon ng ating kasaysayan, tulad ng pre-colonial, prehistoric era, ang Spanish period, at ngayon ng American period. So abangan po ang susunod na episodes ng segment na Food Trip Kainsaysayan, kung saan po natin ipagpapatuloy ang mga talakayan sa ating kasaysayan at sa ating food culture and heritage. So paalam po sa ating mga speaker and ating guest, at malusog at masustansyang araw sa ating lahat. Paalam!
Paalam!